let's have a look at this interesting article from The Guardian. I'll leave the link in the sidebar. It's about Australian woman, Khadija Gablar. Well, she's from Sierra Leone originally, and she lives in Australia, and she's going to have a baby, and she's going to have a baby boy. I don't want to trivialise female genital mutilation, and I hope that she has a beautiful, healthy, bouncing baby boy. But I just want to look at her feminism in regards to her activism around female genital mutilation, because I'm always concerned that feminists, well, I don't want to trivialise female genital mutilation. It can cause, it's going to be dangerous. It can cause dangerous births and deaths and things, and I just want to have a look at her feminism. She's got an unborn son. There was no mention in this article of whether she intends on genitally mutilating her own child. It doesn't go without saying, as far as I'm concerned, because a lot of feminists believe that female genital mutilation is one thing and male genital mutilation is another. For example, British MP Enna Soubry thinks that female circumcision is not circumcision. She believes that male circumcision is circumcision, and that's okay, of course, according to her, and the other is not okay. Of course, no one's arguing that female circumcision can be, female genital mutilation can be more severe than male genital mutilation. It doesn't, of course, make male genital mutilation right. Let's hope she has a beautiful, Gablar has a beautiful, healthy baby soon. Khadija Gablar is one of Australia's few outspoken survivors of female genital mutilation. That's fair enough. I consider myself, by the way, a survivor of male genital mutilation. Gablar was delighted to find out she was having a boy. She's trying to fight off the thought that she and her son could die during the delivery. Yes, no one's arguing with the medical consequences of the most severe forms of female genital mutilation. No one is not arguing with that. She's from Sierra Leone. Her mother took her to a hut where an old woman cut out her clitoris with a rusty knife. She then threw the piece of flesh across the room like it was the most disgusting thing she'd ever seen, Gablar recalled. Well, I'll give you the link to Pondoland in South Africa, where you can see the results of what a rusty knife can do to underage males in Africa, and that includes death and amputation of the penis and everything. Now, I have a bit of I don't argue that she was cut with a rusty knife, but whenever we hear descriptions of female genital mutilation, it's always a rusty knife or a dirty knife. No one ever discusses male genital mutilation in the same breath as a rusty knife. Of course, for millennia, for thousands of years, males were castrated with rusty knives. Rusty knife, male genital mutilation is still going on in Africa. Link again to Pondoland to have a look at that. I find it emotive that the rusty knife expression, the dirty rusty knife, is always used by feminists when talking about female genital mutilation. I have a bit of a problem with the rusty. We always expect to hear a rusty knife. I'm not saying that she wasn't done with a rusty knife, but we always hear of the rusty knife. It makes for good frightening imagery. Male genital mutilation. There's been zillions of male genital mutilations throughout history done with a rusty knife, I assure you. She talks about the doctor as the person who's going to bring my baby into the world. The people who brought me into the world genitally mutilated me, and I screamed and screamed, and they just strapped me down and held me down and did it without anesthetic, and I screamed and I screamed, and they still did it. They wouldn't stop. I was bleeding, they wouldn't stop. I was in agony, they wouldn't stop. They kept doing it to me, actually. Again, I remind you, I'm not trying to trivialize female genital mutilation or the medical consequences or the dangers to mothers and their babies from female genital mutilation. I'm not trying to do that. I'm just looking at feminism, because I find that feminists will, generally speaking, will not defend a male genital integrity. Even feminists in position of power, even women who should be female champions of change. Yes, they talk about male champions of change, but they will not utter a word in defense of a baby boy's genital integrity, those same women. I hope that Khadija Gablar will see it see it possible to put in a word for male genital integrity for her little boy. I hope so. Still, as I said, a lot of people consider male genital mutilation, not male genital mutilation, and female circumcision they consider genital mutilation. I call that sexism. I call that discrimination on grounds of gender. But to continue, in all states and territories it is illegal to carry out FGM and to take an Australian citizen out of the country to undergo FGM. That is true, but remember, you can mutilate a little boy anywhere in Australia. You can circumcise a boy in Australia anywhere, but you can't do a cat or a dog or a kangaroo. You can't circumcise a kangaroo. You cannot. You will be prosecuted by the RSPCA for cruelty to animals. You will be. So there's a whole double standard obtaining. What annoys me is feminists, including Khadija, they get sexist about the whole matter. They blame it on the patriarchy. And some advocates argue FGM is not a violent practice, and while it needs to be stopped, the debate should be framed thoughtfully, particularly in Western countries where women with FGM can end up feeling ashamed of their culture or isolated from the wider community. We're always concerned that women are allowed to feel shame, aren't they? Women are allowed to feel shame from sexual assault or from genital mutilation. Boys aren't allowed to feel any shame. If a woman is sexually assaulted, say digitally penetrated by Rolf Harris, for example, there was mention of feelings of shame. The Sex Discrimination Commissioner went out on a date she agreed to go out on a date with somebody she didn't want to go out with, date or dates. She went out on a date or several dates, and she felt shame afterwards. And men were to blame apparently for sexual harassment. She was allowed to feel shame. Boys aren't allowed to feel shame for being genitally mutilated. I've got extra holes in my penis. I'm not allowed to feel shame for that. I'm not allowed to feel shame for not having a foreskin, apparently. Gablar is emphatic in her view that FGM is abuse and will not be stopped with a softly approach. So she feels it's abuse. She's like Julia Gillard, who said, there is no place in any religion or culture for female genital mutilation. That's what Gillard tweeted. But back to Gablar. When I think of FGM, I think of someone pinning me down and holding a rusty knife and cutting away at my flesh, and I'm begging them to stop and they don't. I would think anyone would call it violence. There's no way to turn it around. Taking a knife to a little girl's private parts is violence. They're taking a sharp object, a rusty knife, and poor scared little children then left there to bleed, she says. So according to Khadija Gablar there, it's implicit in what she says, it's always a rusty knife that's used for female genital mutilation. It's always a rusty knife. I hope that she always calls it violence when you take a knife to a little girl's private parts. But Khadija, is it violence when you take a knife to a little boy's private parts? That's what concerns me. Someone held me down and pinned me down and cut away at me, and I screamed and screamed too. I did, but they didn't. They just kept on doing it, didn't they? Back to Khadija. It's child abuse. It's not about culture. There's no cultural defence for any kind of abuse. She's talking about in the context here of females here, but does she feel this way about males? It's child abuse. It's not about culture. There's no cultural defence for any kind of abuse. Nobody should be able to hide behind culture. This is about patriarchy, gender. This is about trying to control the sexuality of women. So it's about patriarchy. But didn't you say that your mother had it done to you? Didn't you say that the woman who cut you with this rusty knife was a female? She wasn't a drag queen, was she? So you're saying it's patriarchy and gender. This is about trying to control the sexuality of women. But women did this to you. Women did this to you. Gender. And men are to blame, apparently. Certainly, traditionally, Australian men have not been into a female genital mutilation. They haven't been. You say it's about patriarchy. Vivian Strong, who manages the New South Wales education program on FGM, is much less inclined to dismiss the claim that FGM may be viewed by some as a legitimate cultural practice. In spreading the message that FGM is both illegal and dangerous, she works with facilitators whose background is in each country where FGM is prevalent, So the target groups do not feel they're being singled out by a white society. It's extremely important to communities that they're treated with respect, that the women are treated with respect, and that we recognize that this is a cultural practice. It's not a practice of violence, it's not a practice of violence as seen by people in a traditional setting. It's seen as a practice that makes their daughter acceptable in those societies. Respect for people's cultural differences, or recognizing the harm this particular practice can cause, is important, and that of course comes under the banner of the rights of the child, the rights of the adolescent, the rights of girls. That's interesting that the rights of the child, the rights of the adolescent, the rights of girls are mentioned, because if we were talking about boys, the rights of the child, the rights of the adolescent, the rights of boys, the Children's Commissioner would not utter a word in defence of male genital integrity. She would not see male genital integrity as a human right for boys, nor would the Sex Discrimination Commissioner, and nor would the President of the Human Rights Commission, who preaches that children should be educated in learning about their fundamental human rights, but she would not ensure that boys were taught that male genital integrity was a human right. We talk about the rights of girls when female genital mutilation is concerned. We don't talk about the rights of boys where male genital mutilation is concerned. We don't. We describe female genital mutilation as an act by the patriarchy, according to Khadija Gabla and others. It's men who do it. Men who do it. Women, sisters are doing it to themselves. Women are cutting up other women. They're cutting up their daughters, and men are to blame for that. A long period of fury followed, particularly at her mother. This is about Khadija Gabla, who also had FGM when she was a young girl. "How could you do this to me?" she asked her mother repeatedly. Her mother refuses to apologize. Well, Khadija, why should your mother apologize if the patriarchy are to blame? Why would you say, "How could you do this to me," when the patriarchy are to blame? Your mother isn't a man, is she? The patriarchy is to blame, according to you, for female genital mutilation. So what has your mother got to apologize for? What is she guilty of? You said it was the patriarchy. You said it was sexism, didn't you? That's what you said. My mum, as for the pain, she doesn't care. She doesn't feel guilty that she did that to me, she says. You said that it was the patriarchy that did it to you. You didn't say it was your mother that did it to you. You said the patriarchy were to blame. That's what you said. So your mother has nothing to feel guilty about or apologize for. The patriarchy is to blame, according to your feminism. Any anti-FGM campaigner, Khadija Gabla, does not agree with those who say cultural sensitivity is needed in the fight to eradicate it. She says it is a violent act against women. I feel that way about male genital mutilation. But she says it is a violent act against women. Are you saying it's a gender-related thing? Are you saying that it's patriarchy doing it to women? Is that what you're saying? She says it is a violent act against women. She's not saying, though, it's a violent act against women by women. She said it was the patriarchy. But at the same time, she's saying her mother did it to her, and she was saying, "How could you do this to me?" But this is what feminists will do. They will blame men for female genital mutilation. Indeed, Khadija Gabla said elsewhere in a radio interview, either on SBS or ABC, on radio, she said that she thought that female genital mutilation was invented by a man to control the sexuality of women. I feel that way about male genital mutilation being used to control the sexuality of men. My mother had myself, my two brothers and myself genitally mutilated. My father wasn't genitally mutilated. It wasn't my father's idea to have me genitally mutilated. It was my mother's idea to have me genitally mutilated. And, that could be considered to be the act of a matriarch, couldn't it? It could be the matriarchy where, does it really matter who invented genital mutilation, whether it be for boys or for girls? It should be stopped. It should be stopped. A violent act against women, so it's sexism, yes. Adele Merdolo is commenting now. What does she say? Oops. Adele Merdolo. It's about attitudes, not just attitudes to the practice, but attitudes to gender equality. So, we protect its gender equality when you're talking about female genital integrity, even though it's generally females that are doing all this genital mutilation to other females. But men are to blame for this, apparently. Attitudes to the practice, attitudes to gender equality. And boys are still allowed to be cut up. No one says anything about protecting boys. The Children's Commissioner won't protect boys. The Sex Discrimination Commissioner won't protect boys. So boys, you can cut a boy anywhere in New South Wales, anywhere in Australia you can cut a boy, but you can't cut an animal. You can't circumcise an animal, but you can circumcise a boy, and that's okay. But this is oppression of women by men, apparently. It's gender inequality, slicing up a girl, apparently. That's what they say. There have been no one has ever been successfully prosecuted for female genital mutilation in Australia, but there are a couple of cases around at the moment. There are some cases in the courts at the moment. I won't discuss those. As ever, funding for services is a constant battle. The British government has committed £35 million to ending FGM. Medola says Australia could do with a commitment that was even a quarter of that. Well, Julia Gillard threw £500,000 at protecting little girls from female genital mutilation, and it's already against the law in Australia, and most females in Australia who have been genitally mutilated were genitally mutilated in Africa. Nevertheless, not 1 cent was thrown at protecting a little boy's genital integrity. I have extra holes in my penis, by the way. No one cared about my genital integrity. No one wants to compensate me. No one cares. Even the Sex Discrimination Commissioner doesn't think that boys should be protected from the violent and barbaric act of male genital mutilation. Whoops. At every stage of your life it impacts you. Every woman has... This is Khadija talking again, you know. At every stage of your life it impacts you. Every woman has her own shame and her own isolation and her own experience. It's interesting how we talk about shame in relation to female genital mutilation or assault on females. Males aren't allowed to feel shame for being genitally mutilated. We're not. Doctors will laugh at you if you complain about being genitally mutilated. People don't care about male shame. I used to have a foreskin, you know, but it's gone. I never even got to use it. At every stage of your life it impacts you. Every woman has her own shame and her own isolation and their own experience. I want people to know how terrible this is. I will stand up and say, I don't have a clitoris. She says, I don't have a clitoris. I don't have a foreskin either, Khadija. I'm not saying that the damage you have should be trivialized, but I think boys should be recognized as having sexual parts that are cut out too. There is so much education that needs to be done. Our mothers aren't going to help us. They're not going to comfort us. It's up to us. Your mothers aren't going to help us. That sounds a bit like it could be some sort of matriarchal act, female genital mutilation. That's what it sounds like. It sounds like an act of the matriarchy to me. In any case, I hope that your baby is healthy and whole and happy. I hope that you have a wonderful, as wonderful a birth and a beautiful, healthy, bouncing baby soon. I have a problem with feminism. I do. That won't recognise the human rights of boys. Boys can sit in pools of blood. The Sex Discrimination Commissioner had boys sitting in pools of blood, and she didn't utter a word in their defence. She was deaf to their suffering. She was blind to their suffering. She kept mum about it. As for matriarchy, matriarchs are capable of genital cutting as well. Australia's first people are considered, or some tribes are considered to be matriarchal, and some tribes also practice male genital cutting. I don't know if those tribes that practice male genital cutting are matriarchal tribes, but I'm not convinced that matriarchy or patriarchy is the problem. I think genital cutting is the problem. I think that being cut up against one's will is not nice. I think I agree with Khadija that cutting up, it's not to me. It is an act of violence, and it's an act of violence to boys as well, and not just girls. Good luck to you anyway, Khadija. I hope you have a lovely, healthy baby. I'll leave links into the sidebar. I'll leave a link to Ponderland too, so you can see what a rusty knife will do to a boy, including death. See ya.